Good afternoon, everyone. We'll give just a couple minutes to make sure everyone is able to get logged on, and then we will get started. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's stakeholder briefing on the transportation investments in Governor Newsom's 2024-25 proposed budget. I'm Tammy McGowan. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Communications here at the California State Transportation Agency. And during this 45-minute briefing today, Secretary Tokes Omashawkin will provide an overview about some of the transportation-related investments in the proposed budget that the governor unveiled this morning. After hearing from Secretary Omashawkin, we will move into a Q&A session. And please know that you can use that Q&A portion anytime during the briefing today, but using that Q&A function on the bottom right-hand side of your screen, you should be able to go in and submit any questions. Please be sure to identify yourself along with your affiliation when you submit your questions. Note that we will only be responding to budget-related questions today. And although we do have a hard out at 4:45, we will try to get to as many questions as we can during the time frame that we have. But if we aren't able to get to your questions, please feel free to send in your questions to the media@calsta.ca.gov email address. And again, that's media, MEDIA, at CalSTA, CalSTA.ca.gov. And we'll be happy to follow up with any questions that we may not get to today. We'll also be recording the session today. And if you'd like to receive a copy of that, we will be sending that out automatically to those who are registered. But if you'd like if you have any problems with it, or if you need anything with that, please feel free to reach out at that email address as well. I'd like to thank and appreciate the folks who are with us from our leadership teams from the CalSTA departments that are under CalSTA, joining us today to address any specific department related questions. So thank you for joining us. Tony Tavares, who is the Caltrans director, Steve Gordon, who is the director of the DMV. We also have Brian Annis, the chief financial officer at High Speed Rail, as well as Undersecretary Mark Tollefson and several CalSTA team members as well. And again, I'd like to recognize and appreciate Teresa Calvert, who is here with us from Department of Finance. Now I will go ahead and turn it over to Secretary Omashawkin to give an overview. Secretary Omashawkin.
Thank you, Tammy. Really appreciate you and Marty, the entire comms team, for all the coordination efforts to get this meeting call set up over the last week. And thanks to my colleagues, fellow transportation leaders across the state, for taking the time to also be a part of this. And to the DOF team, Teresa, you and Joe, thanks again for all the work that you guys do to help us in the transportation space. To our partners and stakeholders appreciate again, as Tammy noted, appreciate you taking the time to hear a little bit more about Governor Newsom's budget proposal for this upcoming FY. Good afternoon, and again, thank you for taking the time. I'm going to get right to it. The state is facing a substantial budget shortfall that is requiring us to take a hard look at our spending and programs. If you watched Governor Newsom's budget presentation, you already know many of the solutions the administration is proposing. Just give me 1 second here. I want to make sure my camera's not on. Make sure it is on. Hopefully everybody can see me while I still give the remarks here. Hopefully everybody can still see me.
Secretary, you came on and then you turned it back off.
Oh, really? Okay. It's going to be
hard. So we can't see you right now.
Well, if you don't mind the way I have to do this, because I'm using an iPad, I think it just probably turns off when I go to the remarks. Yeah, okay. I think that's what it is. I'll read this and turn my camera back on. Apologies, everybody. But I'm using an iPad to speak to you today. While there are dark storm clouds ahead, it's also important to note the silver linings. And when it comes to the transportation portion of the budget, I believe there are many. Notably, while the proposals in the governor's budget for transportation contain significant funding shifts and delays, we're able to maintain roughly 99% of funding in the governor's historic transportation infrastructure package and minimize the programmatic impacts across the board. As a state, we're continuing to prioritize our most important transportation investments, putting people first and focusing on our core four priorities of safety, equity, climate action, and economic prosperity. These investments are already benefiting communities throughout the state. In 2023 alone, CalSTA awarded more than $3 billion for public transit projects, $1.2 billion for projects as a part of our historic port and freight infrastructure program, and $350 million for grade separation projects. California has also received nearly $35 billion in federal funding in a little more than 2 years since the passage of IIJA, including more than $24 billion for transportation-related projects. And those numbers don't even include the historic award of nearly $3.1 billion for our high-speed rail project that President Biden just announced last month. So with those positive things in mind, I'll get to the meat of some of the challenges that we're facing in today's briefing. As you're aware, Governor Newsom championed a historic transportation infrastructure package in the 2022-2023 state budget, which grew to $16.1 billion last year with the adoption of the Zero Emission Transit Capital Program. That $16.1 billion, the bulk of it which comes from the general fund, is the primary focus of the proposed solutions from the state's transportation budget, which includes $3.8 billion in delays across various programs to align the budget with expenditure schedules, $791 million in fund shifts, and $296 million in general fund reductions. To go into a little bit more detail on these proposed solutions, there are 4 general fund delays. That includes a delay of $3.125 billion in the TRCP competitive grants and population-based formula programs, a delay of $400 million in the active transportation program, a delay of $150 million in the highways to boulevard program, and a delay of $100 million in the port, freight, and infrastructure program. All these delays align the budget with the project expenditure schedules and should not impact the programs or their overall funding levels. The budget also proposes a shift of $791 million, essentially swapping out some general fund and TRCP for cap and trade dollars with no change in the overall funding amount. Lastly, the budget proposes a couple of general fund reductions. And this is where the reductions are. A reduction of $200 million from the active transportation program, also known as ATP. Even with this reduction, however, we intend to fund the full $1.05 billion of projects originally awarded by the CTC. There's also a reduction of $96 million from the $280 million general fund appropriation in the 2021-2022 state budget for the Port of Oakland. This is not to be confused with the funding awarded to the Port of Oakland recently through the PFIP program. Importantly, of the $16.1 billion transportation infrastructure package I mentioned earlier, these solutions will still maintain $15.9 billion. That's roughly 99% of the funding from the previous budget. These investments are already benefiting communities throughout the state, from public transit to high-speed rail to critical grade separations to supply chain improvements to safe walking and biking options. And maintaining this level of funding will allow us to continue to modernize our vital infrastructure. Again, as the largest contributor of planet warming pollution in California, transportation has to be a part of the solution. We're not backing down on our climate commitment, and the governor's budget is further proof of that. We also continue to make progress implementing CATI, the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. CalSTA is finalizing its second annual report detailing the state's progress under CATI, finding that California has completed nearly all the actions to align the state's transportation funding programs with its climate goals, well ahead of schedule, along with other notable accomplishments. So as I wrap my remarks, I want to emphasize again that we're maintaining nearly all our transportation funding commitments, which will continue to position California for increased infrastructure investments. And we're actively putting those state and federal dollars to work to build a more sustainable and connected transportation system, focusing on putting people first and our core four priorities of safety, equity, climate action, and economic prosperity. With that, myself and our great leadership team here from across the state is happy to answer any questions that some of our stakeholders and partners may have. Apologize on having to switch back and forth from camera to reading a Word document. Maybe I didn't know how to actually exactly do that on WebEx. Apologies, but I look forward to taking any questions that our partners and stakeholders may have. Back to you, Deputy Secretary McGowan.
Thank you, Secretary Omashak. And yeah, we will now open it up to a question and answer period. Please feel free to send in your questions but using the bottom right-hand function, the Q&A function there on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And we will take those as they come. And thank you, Marty Greenstein, also, who is online here helping to moderate some of those questions as they come in.
Yeah, we've got a couple that have already started coming in. So the first one from Rebecca Light: could a bulleted list of the reductions be sent out or placed in the Q&A panel? So the whole budget is on ebudget.ca.gov. And it lays out all the proposals across the budget. And if you just go there, that'd probably be the easiest thing to do rather than putting it in there. But when we wrap this up, we can also share that link with everybody attending so they have access to it. And then the next question comes from Sarah Kane. Thank you, Secretary. Can you please confirm if the TRICP cut is to the competitive and or formula program? And so just to clarify again what the Secretary said, there are no cuts to TRICP. There's some delaying of the appropriations to match the expenditure schedules, but no cuts. But to answer your question about whether it's competitive and or formula, that it is, those delays are for both programs.
Yeah, Marty, thank you for helping out with that, and thanks again for coordinating the efforts along the call. To the first point about listing, I think you're spot on with your response there to go to the website. But again, we fared very well in this budget proposal from this Gen 10 budget proposal from the governor. There are only two cuts, and this is aligned with the second question as well. ATP at $200 million, and then a $96 million cut for previous funding that was provided to the Port of Oakland. There, as Marty mentioned, there are no cuts at all to the TRCP program, only a change and delay, a change in where the money is coming from the general fund to GGRF, and then a delay. So no cuts to TRCP whatsoever. We're maintaining that $5.1 billion from the transit funding from the governor from last year. And let's keep going.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take the next one from Rose Zook. Can CalSTA talk about how the budget for fiscal year 24-25 and for future years will prioritize the projects funded by the Port Freight and Infrastructure Program, also known as PFIP? We continue to hear from Caltrans that the funds are not guaranteed in future years, which has introduced a lot of unease amongst project amongst project awardees, sorry.
Yeah, look, that's a good question. I'll ask Chad or Undersecretary Tillotson to help with this as well. But the PFIP program, as many people know, was one-time funding of roughly $1.2 billion. And our responsibility at the agency and working with Caltrans as well on this is to try to implement that $1.2 billion program as best as we can. In future years, if the budget continues to possibly look better than it looks today, and there's general fund money added to this program, then we will continue to grow the program and be able to sustain it over time. But that program was one-time funding. There's no long-term funding commitment for the PFIP program. So I hope that helps, but again, it all depends on future budget years and how it looks. I don't know if Chad or Teresa or Mark want to add anything to that.
Thanks, Secretary. I would just add that, yeah, we don't intend, for the PFIP program for any of those awards that were made earlier last year to be impacted. Really, the only change that we'll see in the budget is the shift, and this gets to one of the other questions in the Q&A. We will be shifting $100 million from the PFIP program from 24-25 out until 26-27, and this is intended to essentially align the budget with projected expenditures for the program.
Thank you, Mark. If we don't have any further additions on that, I'll go ahead and move to the next question. And it's from Russ Snyder. Do you anticipate a hiring freeze? The proposed budget for 21-22 was 20,668 positions for Caltrans. This budget proposes 22,585 PYs for Caltrans. So perhaps that's a DOF question.
Yeah, I would pass that to DOF. The director may have a direct response on that. Teresa, can you help with that one?
Hi, Teresa Calvert with Department of Finance. There's nothing in our budget documents related to a hiring freeze for the programs that we have listed here.
Okay. Thank you. And are there any changes from Eli Lipman? Are there any changes to the LC Top, STA, or other operations eligible funding programs?
No, not that I'm aware of whatsoever. Mark or Chad, any additional thoughts on that? I don't think we are making changes there, but I'll leave it up to the experts here. Chad? LC Top.
Yeah, none of those programs have changed. They're all tied to estimates of how much revenue comes in. For LC Top, it's a continuously appropriated program. The STA and other programs are also tied to the revenue estimates that Finance and Caltrans have put together on those programs. So there's no change there.
Thank you, Chad.
Thank you, Chad. Moving on to Sean Tejan from Shasta Regional Transportation Agency. The regional agencies just submitted allocation packages for the SB 125 TIRCP formula funds. How will this impact those projects in which agencies submitted funding for fiscal year 24-25? Will we need to modify our allocation packages before receiving any funds?
Short answer will be no, but Chad, is that right?
The total projects are all still funded in this, and none of these changes affect the current fiscal year of funding. The proposal here for the projects that would receive funding in 24-25 is for that money to be provided over 2 years instead of one. For most agencies, that won't change the projects that they submit. If this is adopted, in the final budget, then at that time, we will consider whether there are any changes necessary to the future allocations of funds or the projects that are included. But we are evaluating everything that's been submitted right now based on the current budget. And we will consider the any impacts that you would have on what projects you choose to fund with the funding based on that future adoption of the budget.
Okay. Thank you, Chad. Appreciate it. Next question coming in is from Zach Aquardi. Sorry if I'm missing the name there. This budget proposes various delays and some cuts to transit and active transportation programs, especially the ATP cut and reduced year-over-year TIRCP formula budget. How, if at all, are highway funding programs being impacted?
Look, that's a good question. But again, to clarify, there are no cuts at all towards transit in this budget proposal from the governor. None whatsoever. We're changing the funding source for some of the TRCP dollars, and we're also delaying some funds. The $200 million is the only cut for ATP. And that's not going to impact any of the projects that were proposed and lined up to be funded through ATP. But as far as highway funded project goes, there are no highway projects that are currently being funded from the general fund. The highway projects that we have in California, most of them are either funded through direct measures from local government or the gas tax. So there's no, to the question from the individual, I'm not sure I remember exactly the name, but there are no cuts being proposed from the gas tax related to transportation projects. It's a completely different fund. What's being covered in the governor's budget here is the general fund related impacts, and that's a special tax. But it's a good question. And again, only $200 million on ATP. No cuts at all for transit.
Thank you, Secretary Omashak. And the next question is from Georgia Gandorman. First, she thanks the administration for retaining such a strong commitment to transportation in this tight budget year, specifically with respect to the $5.1 billion transit package. Can you confirm the intent is to retain the GGRF commitments to the zero emission capital program as was laid out in last year's budget deal?
Yeah, that's another good question. I'm going to call, Chad. I was going to ask Chad or Undersecretary to answer that one.
Yeah, we're maintaining all of the zero emission transit capital program funding, both the GGRF side of that and the PTA side of that. So that's all still fully funded.
Okay, thank you, Chad. Next is from Raj Barrel Biggs, and he is from Cardoza Associates. He's asking, with recent decline of traditional state revenue sources, how do you see the transportation funding to be in the near future, say the next 5 years? Do you see this year to be atypical of coming years?
One more time, Deputy Secretary McGowan.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. With recent decline of traditional state revenue sources, how do you see the transportation funding to be in the near future, say in the next 5 years? Do you see this to be typical of coming years?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Look, I'll say, I think on the traditional way we fund transportation in California and most of the states in the country, from the gas tax, we are starting to see a bit of a decline. The revenue amounts are not going up as they have traditionally. It's not that I saw if you look in our 8 pages from DOF, where they're actually not looking that bad as far as the gas tax part and the different ways we fund transportation. Things are fairly okay now, but a lot of the national projections that I've seen, including some in California, show that by the year 2030, so roughly 6 or 7 years from now, you will start to see a more significant decline in revenue because of the shifts and transitions we're making towards zero emission vehicle. Because again, reducing our major revenue, our main revenue source, and because of the zero emission vehicle efforts, we will start to see a decline there. But as far as general fund, again, the general fund, the money from it comes from various sources across the state. It's been great for us in California that in the last 3 or 4 years, the governor and the legislature have allowed some of that general fund money to come into the transportation space to help fund some very unique projects like PFIP and ATP and TRCP. But I think we need to be mindful of 6 or 7 years from now, roughly, when we're projected to see more declines on the gas tax side of revenue for transportation.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Stephen Hanamaikai from San Luis Obispo Council of Governments. He's asking, will the $200 million reduction to one-time ATP funding impact funding levels for future cycles beginning in cycle 7?
I think potentially so, but just to make sure, Undersecretary Tolson, can you help with that one?
Yeah, thanks, Secretary, and appreciate the question there. So with the ATP program, we are going to continue to work with the California Transportation Commission to figure out kind of where that additional funding would come from and from what years. Absolutely, there will be impacts to future cycles. Whether or not that begins in cycle 7 or would be a subsequent cycle is TBD at this point, but we'll continue to work with the team to try to minimize the impacts.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Undersecretary. Next question is from Robert Naylor. Where are the cuts in other GGRF programs, or are the shifts matched by increased cap and trade revenues?
Chad or Teresa?
Yeah, I imagine. So this is a good question. We saw that came up in the Q&A chat. So we're trying to find an answer just because we in our area don't have GGRF proper. So we'll try to find that. And if we're not able to during this call, try to follow up to respond. If you could let us know your email in the chat, just in case we don't have that by the end of the call.
Great. Thank you, Teresa. Really appreciate that. Okay, next is from Fina Siegel. She's saying 200 million is a lot of money to come out of active transportation and would fund, oh, sorry, it just switched on me. Yikes. Okay, and would fund a lot of protected bikeways. Is it possible to move highway funds to help fund more ATP projects? I'm going to read that one more time. 200 million is a lot of money to come out of active transportation and would fund a lot of protected bikeways. Is it possible to move highway funds to help fund more ATP projects?
And just before we answer that question, there's 2 other questions that are kind of similar that ask, can we backfill cuts with the state highway account funds as was done last year? So maybe we could address all these questions at the same time instead of one after the other.
I think that's a good question, and I'll see if the Undersecretary can help me a little bit with this as well. Look, we as a state, from CalSTA to Caltrans, everybody working on the CTC, everybody working on ATP related projects in the state, our commitment is at the highest level it's ever been, I believe, in this state. I really believe that from a policy standpoint and even funding. And the administration, DOF, they've had to make a hard decision here, a hard choice about where to identify opportunities to create a balanced budget. As Caltrans continues to build projects, I'll tell you that outside of the special fund, which is what ATP is, outside of that, as they're building projects, whether it be a maintenance project or a new project, that's a part of what our policy is today, is that we were going to use a complete streets approach to build even protected bike lanes into infrastructure projects. But this ATP money, again, it's a special set aside to help make more of those projects happen. But overall, as we build projects, it's our outlook as a state, as an entirety of a state, that we're looking for opportunities to build more protected facilities to increase walking and biking in the state. But I'll turn it over to Mark and then the director if they have any additional comments as far as the SHA component.
Yeah, thanks for that. And specifically to the question of the SHA, this year we did not, include in the budget, that backfill. It's something that definitely can be, considered as we, continue through the budget process. But we did not propose the $200 million backfill of the general fund reduction with SHA.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next question from Timothy Burr Jr. Will this proposed budget impact or delay any of the DMV's rulemaking actions in 2024?
I don't believe so, but Director Gordon, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, Secretary. I think that I don't believe it's going to have any impact on our rulemaking capabilities. Thank you.
Okay. And a follow-up question from Zach Acquardi. He says, thank you for the answer to my question. And now he has a follow-up. Last year's budget used state highway account dollars to preserve ATP funding levels. Why isn't that being proposed again in this year's budget?
Again, just a even more challenging budget season this year with $37.9 billion that were a deficit that we're facing. And again, the administration had to make a difficult, challenging call here on where monies could be pulled in the transportation side that we're using general fund money. And that was one of the areas. But as the Undersecretary mentioned, this process is still ongoing, and we'll see possibly how we may be able to find ways to backfill some of that $200 million. But we're still, again, what's been committed to already, over $1 billion. We're going to move forward with all those commitments in ATP, and it's the department's commitment at Caltrans, CTC, others who are working on ATP to continue to build those into gas tax funded projects as well. So ATP is just not a general fund issue. Also, as we build projects every day at Caltrans and at CTC, as we work on those, we're including the ATP Complete Streets concept.
Thank you, Secretary.
Yeah.
Okay, next question is from Raj Baril Biggs, and he is a consultant. He says, the current federal bridge funding, HBP, is not sufficient to meet the current obligations. Are there ways for the state to bolster the current bridge funding?
Look, that's been and I'll ask the director to chime in on this as well. Look, that's been a problem that's been ongoing for many years. We've got a nine-figure backlog in the highway bridge program at Caltrans. And we believe there are some ways to use, again, the formula funding from the federal government, from IIJ, to assist with that, but also look at all the discretionary funding efforts from USDOT to help assist with the HBP to fill some of those holes and gaps we have. But it's one of the programs that's most backlogged, where there's a significant, high demand for bridge repair work across the state. And those competitive grant programs from the federal government, I believe, can help us fill some of those shortfalls or gaps that we have in the program. But it is not a perfect solution, those competitive grant programs. I don't know if anybody from Caltrans has anything else to add. Mike Keever, anybody on HBP?
Yeah, Secretary, I think you're right on point. With the number of notices of opportunities for funding opportunities out there, the NOFOs. I think the discretionary programs that IJA is providing to us now is another avenue, and we'll be working with all of our cities and local agencies to ensure that they submit those applications. Did want to mention the HBP program is one of the programs, the Federal Bridge Program is not necessarily being impacted by the one-time general fund delays.
Okay. We have one final question, and that question is from Marvin Norman. He says, what impact will this budget have on meeting the CARB goal of reducing VMT by 25% below 2019 levels by 2030?
One more time,
Sure.
Secretary.
What impact will this budget have on meeting the CARB goal of reducing VMT by 25% below 2019 levels by 2030?
Yeah, what impact will this budget have on that? Was what the question?
Mhm.
No, it's a very good, that's another very good question, and something that we at CalSTA we're paying a lot of attention to, that commitment that CARB made, because it's no doubt a very aggressive goal to have that 25% reduction. And to get there, it's across the board in transportation where we need to focus. It's making sure that more and more people are not SOVs as far as the driving space, that more and more people can share a vehicle possibly together, but also that means investments, maintaining investments or increasing investments in transit and walking and biking as well. So it's three fronts where that needs to happen on the transportation space to meet that 25% goal. There are other things like land use as well that play a major role in being able to achieve that 25% goal. So, look, the short answer to the question is for this one cycle, it may not be the biggest sort of beneficiary to that goal just because of that $200 million reduction for ATP. But from every other vantage point and the work that we're doing in those three areas I mentioned for transportation, specifically transit, bus transit, rail transit, a lot.
I think we're having a rough connection, Secretary. We missed the last part of what you just said. You're back. You're back. I can hear you. Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay.
You might want to turn your camera off,
Short
Secretary.
Okay, turn it off. Maybe that helps.
Yeah.
So to answer the question as briefly as I can, the last part of what I said is the $200 million reduction for now, and it's for now, it doesn't necessarily help us achieve as best as possible that 25% reduction goal. But in every other facet of the work that we do from a policy and funding standpoint, we're generally headed in the right direction. We're maintaining our transit funding with more money for buses and rail than we've ever had before. Our highway side of the program, we're looking at, again, how to increase opportunities for people to share vehicles, more HOV or possibly hot lanes in the state. All those things are going to help with that 25% side, but ATP is the one small cut that we're facing this year. But long term, I believe, again, as the budget continues to improve, we'll continue to head in the right direction on this. So good question.
Okay, and we did receive one final question. I think we have time to answer this one final question from Ryan Niblock. He says, we understand that half of the, I'm sorry, Chad, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
I can answer the question, if you want me to on the funding, but go ahead and read it. I was just getting on screen.
Okay, we understand that half of the first year of TIRCP formula funding will be delayed. How certain or uncertain are we that the other years of funding will be available in the intended years?
Okay, and to answer that question, the first year of TRCP funding is not being delayed. All $2 billion of TRCP will be provided by April 30th. Of the second year of TRCP funding, the first half of it should be provided as early as the end of this coming summer, still in 2024. What we're really talking about here is that last portion, the last $1 billion of TRCP statewide, which would be provided as early as the summer of 2025. And so 75% of this money is going to be available to be spent from that TRCP bucket right away, really in this coming calendar year or in this current calendar year. And then the last 25% of it provided after that in the following year. So for agencies that have submitted full plans, in most cases, they are not going to spend the money as fast as it's being provided. And in our other program, our competitive program, we aligned the funding allocations with the actual expenditure plans submitted by the agencies that have been awarded projects. So we really don't expect a programmatic impact or any significant delays in projects due to these budget actions.
Okay, and we will end on that note. I think that looks like we're at time here. I want to again express my appreciation to all of the speakers here today and to Secretary Omashakam for the overview. Thank you all for joining us. If you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to us at that email address that I shared earlier, media@calsta.ca.gov, and we'd be happy to get back to you. We will be sending out a copy of the recording to those who are registered. And thank you again. Have a wonderful evening.